faith.
I have the Robert Frost poem on Mending Wall about the uncut stones.
Yeah? Okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it. Good morning, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Let me put this on. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova. Happy, healthy, sweet New Year to everyone. Welcome back. Hope your week has been good. Following our learning together this morning, you're all invited to shul. Tat Shabbat this morning and a service this morning, and there's no bar mitzvah, it's a baby naming, so just a quiet shul, and then we'll have lunch. And then Parsha group is meeting afterwards, so everybody's invited to come and share that. This evening begins the holiday season. Slichot is the Ashkenazic Slichot. Last week we had the Sephardic Slichot. Tonight is the Ashkenazic Slichot. The topic tonight is Jews and Germans, can we ever forgive? The greatest evil in the world, can we ever find a way to reconcile? Please come in. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. Good morning. Good morning. Sharon, good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Shabbos. We'll begin at 6 o'clock. There'll be a light dinner and a film. The film is the story of an Israeli couple, young Israeli couple, Jewish couple, who moves to Germany. And their motivations for doing that and the reactions of their parents and grandparents who are survivors to their moving to Germany. Following that, we'll come down the hall, and Rabbi Farkas and a dear friend, Dr. Richard Campbell, will have a panel discussion. Richard was I believe I have this right, cultural attaché in the United States Embassy in Germany for many, many, many years, and is an expert on German culture. Noah returned in the spring from a trip that was sponsored by the German government for Jewish educators. Okay, so tonight, 6 o'clock is the film and dinner. 7:30 is the conversation. Following that, we'll change the Torah mantles, make Havdalah, and the Slichot prayers will follow. Everyone is invited. And then late at night, about 10:30 tonight, we do a late night traditional Slichot. So if you have lots more sins, you can bring them and we'll get them all cleaned up for you. Please come. At the end of this week, of course, the next week we'll have Torah study like usual. I'll be a little strange, but we'll have it. And next week, on Sunday night, the holiday begins. If you're from VBS, you can pick up the tickets this week. There's these ticket pickup times, and you'll save us the mailing costs. Otherwise, we'll mail them to your home. If you're a member of another synagogue, call them and start screaming and panicking. If you're not a member of a synagogue, would like to come here for davening for Yontif, we would love to have you. Just call the office and make arrangements. Because of security, you need to have a ticket. If you can't afford one, we'll make sure you come anyway. But you need to have a ticket with your name on it. If you're coming, listen carefully. There's going to be a lot of security this year. You can tell why. So you need to remember two things. One, bring an ID, something with your name on it, a driver's license, a government ID. What?
They want a picture.
They want a government ID. I mean, if you bring a water bill, I suppose they'll let you in. But if you bring my water bill and you pay it, you can certainly get in. If you pay my water bill, I want to talk to you about a contribution to the building, though. You have to bring ID. We need to know who's in the building. That's number one for the security people. And number two, there's going to be metal detectors. You can just walk through a metal detector. Bags will be checked, things like that. You don't have to take off your shoes or your pants or anything, unless you really need to. But it's just, we want to be very, very safe. We want to be very sure that we're safe in the building. So it's going to take, it's the world. Olam kamin hago naheg, you know. So it'll take you a few more minutes to get into the building. Please be patient. Please be kind. The people doing this are professionals. They're doing the best they can to get everybody through. Right? Come a little early. If you come early, there's fewer people in line. This I can guarantee you. Okay? If you can, parking is always a problem on the holidays. It would be best if you could Uber or Lyft. There is a $5 Lyft coupon. If you give them this code, they knock $5 off the cost, and that will take you pretty much through the valley. So carpool with somebody, hitchhike, but if you can. Otherwise, because the parking is kind of nightmarish, especially on Kol Nidre night. Okay? That's the holiday stuff. Anybody on the other holiday stuff that I forgot? No, Vic, yeah, please.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Where's the mic? You have the mic?
I don't need the mic.
Yeah, no, you do, because the people at home
No,
can't
the
hear you.
people at home.
Okay.
Well, okay, fine.
He's saying
Fine.
important things.
Fine. So, first of all, let me just, in case I'm all red, I'm not surprised. Let me say that Rabbi Gelman is very dear to me, and there's been many things that he's said that has caused this to be. And the other day, I said to Rabbi Feinstein when he was saying he was going to finish whatever he had to say, but then Rabbi Gelman would, of course, have some addendum which would knock it down. And I raised my hand and I said, well, just keep talking too long and don't give Rabbi Gelman the chance.
Ooh.
So I think you knew I was joking. I'm pretty sure that you...
I suspected you were joking.
He suspected I was joking, and apparently some people took it only as snarky. So it was totally meant as a joke.
Okay, that's fine. We were good. Give him Oh. See, this is tshuva. This is what the holidays are all about. Now you don't have to fast on Yom Kippur.
Now get the hell out of here.
Yeah. Billy.
AJU tomorrow is screening a movie about the discovery of the Cairo Geniza, 4 p.m. And I believe the tickets are $18.
Okay, 4 p.m. tomorrow at the AJU up on the hill. A film about the Cairo Geniza, the famous storehouse of ancient texts discovered in the synagogue of Egypt. So please come and see that. Other announcements? Yes, Marcia, you have a question or an announcement?
No, I was just waving my Marsha.
Oh, good. The zwei Marshes. This is good. Okay. I brought you a text I think we've done before, but it's important because it's a commentary on the Torah this morning. So this morning we are in Ki Tavo. Ki Tavo is the beginning of the end of Deuteronomy. It offers the ritual that we will carry out when we finally arrive in the land. It's something that you're familiar with because the text is the text of the Pesach Seder. Ki Tavo al Aretz. When you finally get to the land, Moses says to the people, you're going to settle, you're going to farm the land, you're going to bring first fruits. When you gather your first fruits, bring them in a basket to the holy place that I will name. And this is the ritual that you will carry out. Now, just for a moment, I think it's important to hold for a moment what the transitional moment that the Torah is describing here. This is a people that grew up in the desert. Their parents grew up in Egypt. They have never seen this land. They have never seen any land like this land. Their whole experience, their life experience, is life in the desert, and they're about to enter this lush and fertile land. This is a people that's lived the life of a nomadic tribe. They're the equivalent of what we would call Bedouins. And they're about to move into a settled area and settle into farms and villages and towns and eventually cities. And that is an enormous difference. This is a people that has lived in a desert where there are no neighbors. Just us. We're the only one. It's everything that we've done culturally is self-referential to our own culture. Suddenly you're going to move into a neighborhood where the kids next door have a Christmas tree. And the question is, what happens now? This transition is a remarkable transition. It's a complete revolution in terms of their way of life, their way of looking at the world, their way of culture, their way of faith. And Moses is worried about this. You feel that worry through the whole book. The whole book is tinged with this terrible angst. He knows what's ahead of them. And he's worried because the last time he left, for all of 40 days, they ended up worshiping a golden calf. And now he's leaving forever. What are they going to end up doing? What's going to happen? So that kind of anxiety you can feel. And as we get to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, he's going to get more and more harsh. The end of this Torah portion is brutal. It's really harsh. He's going to tell them, this is the ritual you're going to carry out to remember how you got here. This is the story you're going to tell. Then he's going to give them a ritual where you take two giant stones and cover them with plaster and write the laws of Torah on the stones. Then he's going to tell them to gather in the valley between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, 2 mountains that are outside of Shechem, outside of Nablus. And half the people will stand on one mountain and half on the other, and they will call out the blessings and curses to each other. And then he's going to tell them, and here's the sanctions. Now, if you back away for just a second, Deuteronomy was written on the form, the structure of Deuteronomy is the structure of a contract. It's called a suzerainty treaty. Fancy word. Suzerainty means a vassal and a king. More powerful, it's a dissymmetry of power. More powerful ruler and a less powerful vassal. And the vassal swears loyalty to the ruler, and the ruler swears protection to the vassal. And at the end of the way a suzerainty treaty begins with an historical overview, Deuteronomy begins with an historical overview of the previous relationship of the 2 parties. Then it offers the stipulations of the treaty. Deuteronomy offers the stipulations, all the mitzvot. We learned some of them last week. Then it offers ways of preserving and keeping and remembering the treaty. That's here at the end of the Torah also. And then it offers blessings and curses. Blessings if you keep the treaty, and the consequences if you don't. And they're listed here. So the consequences the consequences have to do with exile from the land. And you can read it, but I'm not going to read it out loud because it's brutal. And you can see what they're talking about. The land, here's the theology. The land is morally sensitive. This land knows if you've been sleeping, and knows if you're awake, and knows if you've been good or bad. So be good, for goodness sake. Because if you blow it, if you lose God in this process, if you worship the gods of the land, if you lose your way, you will get thrown out of this land. But as you're getting thrown out, horrible, terrible, terrible, horrible things are going to happen to you. That's what's at this. So where we are in the book of Deuteronomy is the end of the contract, the end of the treaty, where the consequences are listed. And you'll see that at the end here, all this horrible, terrible stuff. Now, when did this become really important to the people of Israel? This, you can see when this was written. You can taste when this was written, because the description here is actually relatively historical. It talks about a king coming from the north. Okay, those of you who like Game of Thrones, you'll recognize that, right? The king coming from the north who besieges the population, starves them to death, and then takes them into slavery. That's what happened. That's when first the Assyrians, then the Babylonians came from Mesopotamia and sieged the city, the towns, cities, and villages of Israel, took the population into captivity. By the waters of Babylon, we sat and we wept. More than weeping, we asked a very powerful question. How can this be happening to us? What just happened? So that's 500 years after these events. Sitting by the waters of Babylon, in exile, having witnessed the destruction of everything dear to us, the populace of Jerusalem asks the question, what just happened? How can it be that we, the chosen people of the God of the universe, find ourselves without a land, without a city, without a temple, without a home in the world, completely powerless and peripheral to the events of history, living in exile, in another land, our children speaking another language? How could this possibly be? This is the great problem, cognitive dissonance, right? Your sense of identity clashes with your sense of reality. Cognitive dissonance. So the Jewish people set about trying to figure this out, and they embrace a theology that was offered by the biblical prophets. And the biblical prophets had said to them again and again and again, the land you're living on is not your entitlement. The land you're living on doesn't belong to you. The land you're living on is a lease, and it comes with obligations and responsibilities. If you fulfill the obligations and responsibilities, you'll live on this land a very long time. But if you violate the lease, we're going to throw you off the land. Now, you can step back and say, you know, Rabbi, that's a little neurotic. Because, you know, the Babylonians were probably going to want to take the land anyway. It wasn't Jewish misbehavior that caused the exile. It was Babylonian geopolitics. Yes and no. We can argue that one. Because the question, first of all, the question is which story prepares you to face the reality of exile? That's just a pragmatic question. The bigger question is, was there a way to have made our peace with the Babylonians and not ended up in exile? And the prophet Jeremiah thought there was. The real question, though, is how do you explain where you are in the world? And this Torah portion, which echoes the prophetic warnings, gives an ideology which allows you to understand that our position in exile does not mean that the covenant is abrogated. It doesn't mean that the covenant is canceled. It doesn't mean that God has rejected us. This is part of the process. God punishing us with exile is part of the process of refining this people and making it worthy of returning to the land again. That's how the tradition read this Torah portion. That's how scholars read this Torah portion. So this becomes an important tool in surviving exile. Now, neurotic? Yes, because neurotic means I blame myself for all the bad things that happened to me. Okay? There's a certain neurotic quality to this, no question. I mean, the person who says I'm suffering and I deserve it, there's something strange about that. I mean, sometimes people do deserve the suffering they get. But the question here really is, what story do you tell that gives you the psychological capacity to withstand this suffering that you're going through? And this is the story that the people of Israel told. Now, I brought you a handout today, and I'm sorry for those watching on TV, I didn't put this up yet, but I'll put it up tomorrow. This is the story that the rabbis told the second time. So 586 BCE, 586 before zero, the Babylonian Empire comes and destroys Jerusalem and exiles the population to Babylon, where they settle by the waters of Babylon. Quickly, here's Jewish history. We stayed there 75 years. The Babylonians were supplanted by the Persians. The Persians saw a political utility in having a Jewish settlement back in Canaan and back in Palestine, in Israel. So the Persians allowed, encouraged, inspired, and paid for the Jews to return to their land and rebuild their temple, the Second Temple. It's rebuilt over the course of many generations, and a Jewish civilization is replanted in Israel around Jerusalem, which becomes powerful and important. When the Persians are supplanted by the Greeks, that settlement goes through a process of acculturation into Greek civilization, which is the Hanukkah story. There's a revolt. There's a revolt in order to establish an independent kingdom. And for 100 years, there's an independent Jewish kingdom in Jerusalem. And then that kingdom is conquered by the Romans in 64 BCE by Pompey. And it becomes a Roman colony. And it remains a Roman colony until 70, or actually 67 CE, 67 after zero, when the Jews rise up in revolt against the Romans. And in 70, the Romans come and do it again. They come and they destroy Jerusalem and destroy the temple and send the Jews into exile. And 100 years later, there are very few Jews living left in Palestine, in Israel. That's the destruction of the temple the second time. The first time we go into exile, we take the documents of the community in 586 and we create the Torah. And we embrace the theology of the prophets as a way of understanding how we ended up in exile. The second time, we create the Talmudic literature as a new way of Jewish life to survive this exile. In other words, when bad things happen to Jews, we write good books. The books of the Jewish tradition don't come about because of comfortable, secure life moments. They come about out of crisis. You write great books as a way of withstanding the impact of crises. I mean, I could make that thesis all through Jewish history. So the first one is the Bible itself is put together as a result of the crisis of the destruction, the first destruction.
So much for Maui.
What?
So much for your concept of Maui.
Oh, I'll still go live on Maui. I'm ready to be the rabbi of Maui. I'm ready to be the chief rabbi of Lanai, Kauai. I'm going to find a way to make poi kosher. All right, it's almost kosher.
Start with huli chicken.
Yeah, that's something like that, right? Yeah, the hula. I want I'm going to, not Maui, we're going to create our own island called Alavai. It's a Jewish island. Can you imagine an island called Alavai? You know, right? People walking around in grass skirts, going, "Oh, Gewalt, you look terrible in that." You know, you know. I just think a Jewish island in that. Anyway, never mind. That's a riff we don't want to get into. So what we have in the Talmud, among the laws and traditions and legends of the Talmud, is a sustained narrative of how we lost the temple the second time. Now, it's related to our Torah portion very directly because it keeps quoting our Torah portion. Because the rabbis, as they're telling the story of the second destruction, are thinking back to the first destruction, which is described in this Torah portion, obliquely, but it's described here. And second of all, you're going to see the way that they modified the theology. They said, yeah, we deserve this, but in a different way. You'll see how that comes about. And what's really interesting is the question of, it's a question of how does a community understand its own failures, its own catastrophes? What beliefs do you have to take in order to understand your own catastrophes? And I offer this to you this week because, you know, you look at the world and you read the paper and you go, ugh. So here's the way that Jews read the paper 1,000 years ago. So you're welcome to keep if you want to read the curses and blessings at the end, if they're really horrendous. So you're welcome to keep that open if you want, but you can close the Chumash now and take out the section that I gave you, okay? This comes from a Talmud in Gittin. The Talmud, you know, is very, very loosely arranged by topic, but not really. So this happens to come into the section having to do with divorce law, but that's not the interesting part. So it begins with a little midrash by Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was a rabbi who lived in Israel after most everybody else left. He was the first generation of the Amoraim of Eretz Yisrael. So the year is about 250, and so we're about 200 years away from 150 years away from the destruction. And he offers a midrash on a verse in Proverbs: "Happy is the man who fears always, but he that hardens his heart shall fall into mischief." And he says, what is that verse about? And then he goes to tell you a story. So this is 130, 140, 50 years after the destruction of the temple. The rabbis are asking, how did this happen to us? How did catastrophe happen to us? Now, because we're in Hollywood, I turned it into a script. That's me. The Talmud doesn't do this. I did this because it's a Hollywood shul. What do you want out of my life? All right? So he starts by saying, because of the funny name, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, a funny name, two funny names, Jerusalem was destroyed. Now, just as a moment, just to make sure we get the context, when a rabbi in Eretz Yisrael says Jerusalem was destroyed, it would be the equivalent, we would say, of the Holocaust happened. Everything holy and sacred to us was destroyed because of two guys. More than that, the temple was the place where God lived. That's where you went to meet God. God was banished from the world. That's what we're trying to figure out. How did we have God as our neighbor, as our house guest, and all of a sudden he split? He left. What did we do? What happened? So he's telling this story. So here's Act 1, Scene 1. And it's the most strangest thing in the world. You want to know, like, what was the cause of an historical catastrophe? Two guys. A guy had a friend Kamsa and an enemy Bar Kamsa. So there was a man in Jerusalem. We don't know who that man was. And he had a friend with one name and an enemy with a very similar name. John and Johnson. Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, right? He once made a party. This kid had a bar mitzvah. And he said to the servant, "Go bring me my friend Kamsa." But the servant, you know how servants are, went and brought the other guy, Bar Kamsa. Now you're reading this and you're saying, I thought we were talking about how the greatest catastrophe in all of Jewish history happened. You're telling me about a bar mitzvah party? Yeah, all bad things happen at bar mitzvah parties. When he, the host of the party, who remains nameless, by the way, saw him, Bar Kamsa, his enemy, at the party, he said, "What the hell are you doing here?" He said, "You're the one who spreads evil about me. What are you doing here?" And in the middle of the party, he confronts the enemy who was at his kid's party, and he says, What are you doing? Get out of here. Get out. Get out. You see what's going on? Said the other, Bar Kamsa, he said, look, since I'm here, let me stay. I will pay you for whatever I eat and drink. He said, look, for whatever happenstance, I'm here. Don't embarrass me in front of the community. Anything I eat and drink, I'll pay you for. I'll stay in the corner. Just don't humiliate me. Now you got to stop for a second. Why did he come to the party altogether? If he knew he was the guy's enemy, right? Bar Kamsa gets a bar mitzvah invitation from the one person in the world who hates his guts. Why would he come to the party? Use your imagination. Why would he come to? Yeah, maybe he thought the guy was gonna. It's a kid's bar mitzvah. The kid's his daughter's wedding. He wants to shake my hand. We'll become peace. He came. So the crisis of his expectation. He's walking around the party with a martini and a plate full of little hot dogs and rolls, and he's saying to himself, finally, I'm going to get to make peace and apologize to the guy. And we'll have reconciliation. And instead, the guy confronts him. And instead of saying, I'm so glad you came, it's time that we lived as one, the guy says, you son of a bitch, get out of my party. You see the crisis, the complete turnabout of expectation, the powerful humiliation. And he says, listen, don't kick me out. The whole community's here. I'll sit in the corner. You won't see me the whole night. And I'll send you a check tomorrow for whatever I eat. You won't have to feel like you feed me. The guy says to him, no, get out. Get out. He says, I'll pay you half the cost of the party. Jewish caterer could be some serious bucks. He says, no, get out. He says, I'll pay you the whole cost of the party. Let me pay you everything. Just don't humiliate me in the eyes of the community. And the host still refused and took him by the hand and put him out. Says the other, Bar Kamsa. Now listen to what Bar Kamsa says, right? Since the rabbis were sitting there and didn't stop him, it showed they agreed with him. I will go and inform against them to the Roman government. So we're living in Jerusalem. The Romans are governing Jerusalem. The Romans are very nervous rulers. They're very nervous, worried about revolution all the time. It's sort of this very, very sensitive, tender moment. You don't want to set this off. And the Romans have powerful forces there. They have a garrison. So what is Bar Kamsa threatening to do? Bring holy hell down on the Jewish community. Why? Because he's humiliated. What really humiliated him? Remember, quickly he forgets about the host. Who does he point to? The rabbis. And he says, the rabbis sat there, watched this scene, didn't intervene. It's their fault. It's therefore the community's fault. Let them all drop dead. This is called in the Talmud spite. I don't know if this exists in your family, but I'd rather be dead than right. I'd rather be right and dead, I mean, this is what he's doing. I mean, you understand what he's doing, right? I'll show him. I'll show them. And what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is this is why the whole city was destroyed. Now, just incidentally, let's play this out for a moment. The rabbis sat there, right? Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Let's imagine they are. Why didn't they intervene? Why didn't they intervene? You've been to bar mitzvah parties. All right, they were drinking and eating and having a glorious good time and didn't pay any attention. Okay, yes, could be. What? They
were guests.
All right, they're guests. It's not my party. I'm supposed to be a good guest. I'm supposed to keep my mouth shut. Yes. Ah. Are you imputing pecunious motives to leaders of the spirit? You damn right. The host was a big donor. Bar Kamsa? Not so much. If I have to choose sides, says the rabbis, not this rabbi, of course, but some rabbis that we know, right? No, not him. We know. No. Some rabbis that we know.
Before Yom Kippur.
Oh, come on. Vic, get up here and apologize again. But by the way, let's just stop for a moment, and justify that. That's not so. Listen, you're a leader of a community. You're responsible for the community. Financial support and resources are terribly important to the community. If I have financial resources, I can do things. I can feed the poor. I can care for the sick. I can help the homeless. I can teach children. I can care for the elderly. Yeah, I'm going to protect the guy who helps me do that stuff because that extends my mitzvahs into the world. It's not for myself. That's not such a, I mean, really? Really? You get every year in the Jewish Journal, and you'll see it this week. Somebody writes an obnoxious article about how they object to paying a fee for a seat at a high holiday service. Okay, I get it. You'll spend $4 for coffee at Starbucks, but right? You know, look, we make it, if anybody can't afford to come to shul, you come. I mean, I'll give you the ticket myself. You come sit next to me on the beamer, right? Seriously, but where do you think that money goes to? I mean, that money pays for scholarships for kids. That money pays for a food bank. That money pays for care for elderly people. What do you think that we do with the money, right? I mean, so that, all right. So he's done. So you could say it's an unfortunate thing. They should have placed their communal ethics and responsibilities as leaders above their loyalty to the guy because he gave. But on the other hand, you know, you can understand why they did what they did. Well, the answer is, of course, I always get a teenager who yells at me. Why do I have to pay to pray? I said, you don't. You can pray. 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 You want a chair? You want me to turn the lights on? You want air conditioning? You want a security guard to keep an eye on the building while you're here? You want a cantor who's spent all summer practicing the music? You want a rabbi who took some time to think about something to teach you? You want a prayer book in your hand? You want that? Look, if you can figure out how to pay the DWP with prayer, I'll let you in for free. I mean, I have tried, by the way, because I get these I live here in Encino, I have a big lawn. I get enormous bills from the Department of Water and Power. I write them, I'm a rabbi. Oh, never mind, don't pay. All right. So but who's telling the story? Who's telling this story? The rabbis are. So what are the rabbis saying? What are the rabbis saying? What are the rabbis saying? Bar Kamsa says the rabbis sat there and watched me be humiliated. They didn't intervene. They didn't protect my dignity. They didn't make peace in the community. They failed as leaders. That's fine. That's Bar Kamsa's opinion. But it's the rabbis telling the story. So what are the rabbis saying?
Maybe he's right.
We failed. It wasn't the Romans who destroyed the temple. We destroyed it. We rabbis destroyed it. This is a remarkable idea. The Romans couldn't touch the temple. We destroyed it. The only people who can destroy the Jewish people are the Jewish people. That's the sermon, Rosh Hashanah. Now you can stay home. I'm serious. The only people who can destroy the Jewish people are the Jewish people. And why do the Jewish people destroy the Jewish people? Because we forgot our ethics, because we didn't stand up as leaders, because we didn't have the courage at the moment. And because it's interesting, because where it starts, it doesn't start with geopolitics. It starts with the most innocuous things, the texture of communal relationships. If in a community, people walk around feeling left out, angry, bitter because they don't feel like they're included, contemptuous because they don't feel like they're at home, if they feel like the leaders of the community don't give a damn about their concerns and their being in the world, that's where the destruction of everything holy in the world starts. That's a remarkable observation. How come the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed and God was exiled from the world? Well, it starts at a bar mitzvah party 20 years ago. Really? That's a remarkable observation. Douglas.
There's never been a temple that hasn't had this kind of interceding rivalries.
Talk loud. Talk loud.
There's never been a temple that hasn't had that kind of conflict.
Yeah. What the hell is with this?
Two Jews, three opinions.
Well, but you know what? That's a question. That's two Jews, three opinions. Can we ever get along? Can we ever figure out a way to make common cause? You understand what was going on at the time? The Romans were in Jerusalem with soldiers. And what were we doing? Killing each other. Wait, you're going to see that in a minute. It gets worse. Or better, depending on how you like to look at it. Look at the next one. So Bar Kamsa goes to the Roman governor. Yes, David?
Does this argument applies to the Holocaust as well?
No.
Logic?
Leave that out for a minute. We'll go there later. Leave that out for just a minute. You can, I mean, look, if you want to say, well, it's really hard to do that. Let's leave that out for just a minute. Yes?
About the rabbis sitting there and not doing anything
Yeah,
about it?
yeah.
Can you make a case for the right action on the part of the rabbis being to talk to the host later?
Maybe they were going to talk to the guy later. Maybe Bar Kamsa really was a son of a gun and deserved to be kicked out of the party. I mean, you can think of lots of scenarios that might have justified it. The facts not in evidence. But the evident fact is that there was a breakdown. Give it to them. There is a breakdown in communal relationships on a micro level, on the personal level. And the first midrash, this is a collection of stories. The first story says the reason why God left the world and the temple got destroyed is because we allowed communal relationships to break down to such a point that Jews couldn't sit down and have a meal together. And when Jews can't sit down and have a meal together, God leaves the world. I mean, you see what they're trying to? It's a very poignant and painful observation. It's a broken foundation. You can't build a mighty temple on the basis of a fractured community. It's a very, very poignant observation. Pop.
The reason why we can't have complete quiet, there are people who say the way it is perfect.
Yeah.
And there are people who say, no, it can be better.
Yes.
It can be better. I'm not satisfied with the way it is.
Well, I wish it were that moral, though.
And the two conflict all the time.
But you see, the question is, if it were that moral, if the discussion were on that level, can we fix it? Can we not fix it? That's a very high-level discussion. What's going on here isn't a high-level discussion, right? I mean, look, you and I grew up in the same house. Your wife was my mother, and Mom used to have words to say about members of the community. I remember that. Not me, of course. I was very quiet, but...
And there are people who say, if you don't do it my way, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's why we have all the trouble
Right,
we have.
and there are people, yes, that's precisely, if you don't do it my way,
Yeah.
I'm leaving.
And then you have ego.
Well, watch, here's the next one, ready? So Bar Kamsa goes to the Roman governor, and he says the Jews are rebelling against you, which is the one thing the governor don't want to hear, because he's terrified of just that. He says, how can I tell? So Bar Kamsa says, send them an offering and see if they'll offer it. So you have to imagine Jerusalem. Okay, so Jerusalem is on a set of hills, but there's one ridgeline that runs directly from the Holy Temple to the North Gate, which is the Antonius Fortress, which is where the Roman governor was, and there was a street called the Cardo that went between them. So every now and again, the governor would send an offering to the temple, right? He'd send an offering to the temple, right? Here, every now and again, the mayor comes to VBS for high holidays. He comes and he speaks, and people say to me, why do you bring politics into the shul? I said, what am I supposed to say no to the mayor? The mayor came to the shul. So the governor sends an offering to the temple as a gesture of goodwill, graciousness, right? So Bar Kamsa says, send them an offering, see if they offer it. If they offer it, you know that they still have goodwill. But if they don't offer it, what will that tell you? That there's a revolt going on, that they're revolting against the Romans, right? So the governor sends with him a nice calf. That's an expensive offering, right? He sends a BMW to the synagogue for the rabbi. He sends a BMW to the rabbi. Nice, right? While on the way, Bar Kamsa, made a blemish on its upper lip, or some say on the white of its eye, in a place where we Jews count it as a blemish, but they Romans don't. All right, you can't offer a blemished animal on the altar. But what counts as a blemish? What counts as a Roman blemish isn't the same as a Jewish blemish. So what he does is he blemishes the animal. He mars the animal in a way that the Romans wouldn't even see it. But he knows that the priests of the temple will. which now puts the priests in a very difficult position. So they bring this animal to the temple, and the priests examine it. And now the priests, or the rabbis, the story imagines the rabbis are running the temple, which is not true. That's anachronistic. It was the priests. The priests, or the rabbis, in the story, have a choice to make, right? What's their choice?
Accept or reject.
Accept the animal, even though it has a blemish. On what basis? So that there will be peace with the Romans. Yes, I know this animal is treif, but I'm going to offer it anyway because I don't want to piss off the governor and start a war. Or reject the animal because I'm more loyal to God's law than to the pragmatic consequences of momentary politics.
Why don't you tell the governor that there is a blemish?
Because the governor wouldn't understand it. The governor would not see that as a blemish. He would see your message as a provocation. He would see the message as a provocation. It's a great idea, but he would see the message as a provocation. So what do? Do you offer a blemished animal, a treif animal, because you want to keep peace with the Romans and not create a war? Or do you refuse to offer it because you want to observe the law that you were trained to observe and you want to keep the temple pure? What's more important to you? The rabbis were inclined to offer it, so not to offend the Romans. On what basis? You all know this. What's the name of the rule that lets you break Jewish law in order to preserve the well-being? Yes, right, pikuach nefesh. On the basis of pikuach nefesh, on Yom Kippur, I am going to tell you that if you're not allowed to fast because you have hypoglycemia or diabetes, or because you're a nursing mom, or because you're pregnant or want to get pregnant, or your mother was pregnant, you're not allowed to fast. If you're supposed to take medicine, you take your medicine. If you're supposed to take it with milk or juice, you take it with milk or juice. If you're supposed to take it with a meal, you have a meal. You are not permitted. It's not even that you're not, you could make a decision. You are not permitted to put your well-being, your physical well-being in any danger to observe a religious law.
Common sense.
It's not common sense, it's an ethic. It's called pikuach nefesh, right? There are reasons for martyrdom in the Jewish tradition, but very few. In this case, pikuach nefesh would say, offer the damn animal and keep peace with the Romans. That's what they were ready to do. But up stepped Rab Zachariah ben Abkulis, who doesn't occur anywhere else in the Talmud, to my knowledge. And he says, you know, guys, people will say that blemished animals are being offered on the altar. People will say, what kind of argument is people will say? Social media, right? This is going to get on blogs everywhere. Do you want to be the rabbi who offered a treif animal on the altar? People will say, and the rabbis say, oh my God, we can't do it. Better to offend the Roman governor than people will say? Right? So they then propose, well, then there's a simpler reason. Don't offer the animal. But the only way that the Roman governor would ever find out is if Bar Kamsa told him. So let's go kill Bar Kamsa. Remember the Keystone Cops? Right? In order to prevent the populace from thinking you offer treif animals, we'll commit an act of collective murder. All right, that sounds reasonable to me. Yeah, hang on. Let's just finish and I'll get it. Right? Right. They proposed to kill Bar Kamsa. So he shouldn't go and inform against them. Up steps Rabbi Zachariah ben Abkulis again. Is one who makes a blemish on a consecrated animal to be put to death? Right? So what do? They rejected the animal. Right? The Romans got the message, and all holy hell fell down on Jerusalem. And Rabbi Yochanan ends his drasha by saying, through the scrupulousness of Rabbi Zachariah ben Abkulis, our house has been destroyed, our temple burnt, and we exiled from our land. Sometimes observing the law is more pernicious, more dangerous, is more destructive than setting aside the law. But it's not even setting aside the law. Pikuach nefesh is the law. All right, Bill has the microphone. Let's back here. Yeah. Wait, get the microphone. We're going to make you famous worldwide. Thousands of Jews, non-Jews, Christians, and friends are watching this today, and they want to know your opinion.
It's not an opinion, it's a question.
Oh, you got.
Why are we referring to the rabbis when it was the priests that were...
Because this is 300 years later, or 150 years later, and the rabbis who are writing this, they're no priests anymore. They haven't been priests for 150 years. The rabbis who are writing this are really not interested in the actual history of what happened. They're trying to tell a story. They're answering your great-great-grandchildren, your grandchildren. And your grandchildren are going to say, how did it happen? How did it happen? How was it? And in this case, David, in this case, the question is the right question. When our grandchildren, I'm waiting for grandchildren, kids, I'm waiting for, when my grandchildren come to me and they say, all right, you're a great teacher of Judaism. Tell me how the Holocaust happened. Explain it to me. Give me a historical, but give me a moral narrative of how it happened. But you see, they're not just interested in a moral narrative of how it happened. They're interested in the bigger question. How is it that human beings exiled God from the world? How is it that we created a world where God is so far away? Once upon a time, God lived right in the neighborhood. God was our neighbor. The Kodesh Baruch Hu was our neighbor. Every morning you could get up and look into his windows. He was right there. He was right there. Now every morning you get up and you say, maybe you're listening to me. How was it? How is it? How is it that we exile God from the world? And the rabbis want to say, it's our fault. The Romans did. The Romans destroyed a building. We exiled God from the world. How? Number one, we ignored the cracking foundation of communal relationships. Number two, we were so scrupulous about how we observed the law that we forgot the bigger picture, the context in which law is observed, the bigger picture of our community and its well-being. We forgot the rule of pikuach nefesh. We forgot that the well-being of the community comes first. This is, the rabbis are doing a mea culpa. A chatati, a shat, a shamti. They're doing a chatati. They're taking a confession. We rabbis, we blew it. But it's more than we blew it. Every time we do this, we blow it again. Now, I know what you're thinking. I see where he's going with this. Maybe I'll come Rosh Hashanah and see what else he has to say. Thank you. Anti-Semites can't touch us. We touch us. That's what the rabbis are saying. And it's a brutally painful thing to read. And it's a failure of leadership. It's a failure of leadership. You see what's going on here? It's a failure of leadership. You want to add something?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that Bar Kamsa didn't deserve to be put to death.
Yes, right.
He committed a deliberate act.
Yeah, of communal subversion. Right. No, you're right. You're right. But Zachariah ben Abkulis doesn't say the guy who informed against us to the Romans and made our lives holy hell, they could have incarcerated him too. I mean, they could have done lots of things to him. Yeah, you're right. But they don't see it. He changes it. He makes him what? A guy who makes a blemish on a consecrated animal. Right? It's a question of how you're going to frame it. What did he really do?
He set him up to be mass murdered.
Yeah. You could make that case. Bar Kamsa deserves to be killed. Right? There's a bracha in the Amidah. It's the 19th bracha in the 18 brachas of the Amidah, called Lamal Shinim Al Yeh Tikva. To those who betray the welfare of the community, let them all go to hell. No, it's in the Amidah. It's in the daily Amidah. It was the last one added because of this. For people who don't, and during the Middle Ages, there's a tremendous literature, and I'll show it to you one day if you'd like, of
Welcome them back into the community again.
well, there's a tremendous literature during the Middle Ages when Jews lived as a tiny, vulnerable minority in great Christian or Muslim lands, about Jews who betrayed the community to the Muslim or Christian leadership and caused destruction of communities, and what you're allowed to do in order to stop them. Are you allowed to kill them if that's the last resort? And the answer is, And we don't know that. I mean, you don't hear that a lot. But if there's no other way to prevent destruction of the community, then this becomes an active question. It's simply an active question. Okay, we're not done yet. Wait, we haven't even gotten to the best part. Get the microphone and talk. Don't point. Talk.
I see a contradiction.
Oh, no
between
kidding.
the reaction of the rabbis. Why?
Yeah, why? What's contradiction?
Well, in the first case,
Now it's warm in here. Jesus Christ.
in the first case, they kept quiet,
Yeah.
and in the second place,
Yeah, they don't know when to talk and when not to.
So why?
Do you notice that rabbis don't know when to talk and when not to?
No, not yet. So there is a contradiction.
Yes.
In their behavior.
Yes. In the realm of ritual, they become very scrupulous. In the realm of human relationships, they become very reticent. Does that tell you something? Sensitive text. Okay, what happens? The Romans come, and the Romans besiege the city of Jerusalem. Anyone ever been to Jerusalem? Okay, good. If you haven't been, your homework is to go. If you leave now, Rosh Hashanah, by the way, in Jerusalem is glorious, just glorious. Jerusalem sits on a big limestone hill. It's on actually several hills. The city sits on a mountaintop. And on top of the mountaintop, they've built walls. So it is a pretty well-defended city. There's only one sort of level entrance to the city, which is the north face of the city, and there's a mighty fortress there. So when the revolt began, the first thing the Jews did is go to that fortress and slaughter the garrison of the Romans and take the fortress. That's the only vulnerable point of the city, the north. More than that, so the way ancient warfare worked is you besiege a city and starve them, right? Watch. The Roman emperor sent Vespasian, who came and besieged Jerusalem for 3 years. In Jerusalem, there were 3 men of great wealth. Nakdimon Ben Gurion, that's where the name Ben Gurion comes from, by the way. You've heard of David Ben Gurion? His real name was Groin, right? But he took the name of this great, powerful man of Jerusalem, Ben Gurion. And this is where it occurs in the literature. Ben Kalba Savua, who was Rabbi Akiba's father-in-law, and Ben Sitzes HaKezet, right? These 3 guys, like 3 zillionaires, live in Jerusalem. One of these declared to the people of Jerusalem, I will keep the populace in wheat and barley. One of them declared, I will keep them in wine, oil, and salt. The third declared, I will keep them in wood. These men were in a position to keep the city for 21 years. 3 really rich guys have warehoused provisions for the entire populace of Jerusalem for 21 years. Plus, Hezekiah, 700 years earlier, had built a tunnel from the spring of Gihon into the city. So the city had an internal water supply and 21 years of provisions. Bring the Romans. Let's have some fun. Let them camp in the Judean sun for a couple of summers while we sit here taking pool, sitting on our hot tubs, eating Ben Kalba Sabua's food. In other words, the city was invulnerable. That's also a rabbinic fantasy, but just go with me. The city was invulnerable. We could have beaten the Romans. But the Zealots were in the city. Who were the Zealots? Well, they were a political religious party who believed that it's Jewish land and the Jews have to expel the Romans. They're really the ones who started this whole fight. And it was part of their ideology that the land needs to belong to us and Jews have to have hegemony over the land. And the Zealots were there. And it bothered the Zealots that the people of Jerusalem were not joining the fight. They weren't joining the fight because they had plenty of food. They weren't joining the fight because they had no reason to fight. And the Zealots wanted everybody to fight. But the people didn't want to fight. So what did the Zealots, watch what happened. The rabbis were the pacifists, peacemakers. The rabbis said, let's go out and make peace with the Romans. Come on, we can figure this out. The rabbis make peace, right? But the Zealots wouldn't let them. They wouldn't let them out of the city because the Zealots guarded all the gates from the inside. On the contrary, they said, let's go out and make war against them. The rabbi said, you're going to fail. You will not succeed. So what did the Zealots do? The Zealots rose up and they burned the stores of wheat barley so that a famine ensued. Why was there a famine in Jerusalem during the siege? Because the Zealots destroyed all the food supplies in the city in order to motivate the people to go fight the Romans. In other words, well, instead of fighting the Romans, what did we do? We fought each other. You get this? The Romans are outside waiting for a war, and what they see going on in the city is Jews fighting Jews. Huh? The Romans didn't understand this. Because this is like, Romans don't do this, you know? Only Jews do this, right? Abba Sikra was the head of the Zealots. He was the, he was the head guy, the head terrorist. He was the Osama ben Sikra, okay? He was the son of Rabbi Yochanan's sister. Oh no, wait a minute. This is a family fight. The head of the peace party, his nephew is the head of the terrorists. You get this? It's like, remember the movie Exodus, the book Exodus? The head zealot, the head Irgun guy is the brother of the head Haganaga. You remember that? If you have to know movies to come to my class, come on. All right, anyway. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, come see me in private. When he came to me, he said, how long are you going to carry on this way and kill all the people with starvation? I left out a long part here, because it's hard to read. It's a long description of the starvation that went on in the city. It was taken almost line for line from our Torah portion today. Because our Torah portion today describes a siege of the city in which the starvation is so bad that mothers eat their children. I'm sorry, but that's what's in it. And horrible, horrible things happen. And the rabbis take the lines of today's Torah portion and they say, this is what happened and this is what happened. And you get this image of just utter depravity and terrible, terrible starvation. And so in the midst of this terrible starvation, Rabbi Yochanan calls his nephew and says, what the hell are you doing? You're going to kill us. They haven't touched the Romans. This is just inside the city. You get this, right? He said, come see me. How long are you going to carry us away and kill us with starvation? Abba Sikra replies to him, no, listen to this. What can I do? If I say a word to them, they'll kill me. If I tell my men that we're going to go negotiate, if I tell my men that we will reconcile, if I tell my men to stand down, what will they do? They'll kill me. Terrorism is like arson. Once you set the fire, you can't stop it. Once you inspire people to do these crazy acts of holy destruction, you don't know what the collateral damage. Abba Sikra says, I have lost control of my men. That's the problem with zealotry, is that you lose control of it very quickly, very quickly. So Abba Sikra says, they'll kill me. So Rabbi Yochanan says to him, devise a plan for me to escape. Maybe I can save something. He recited, okay, pretend to be ill. Let everyone come and inquire about you. Bring something evil smelling. Put it by you so they'll know you're dead. Then you let your disciples get under your bed, but nobody else. They'll know that you're still. They had this idea that dead people are heavier than living people. So what happens is they hold a sort of shiva for him, for Rabbi Yochanan. They pretend he's dead. They hold shiva for him. And then Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Joshua pick up his bier, his casket, and the two students, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, carry him to the gate of the city. Now, who's guarding the gate of the city? The zealots. Now, you're supposed to give safe passage to dead bodies out of the city. And they reach the city guards. The guards want to put a lance through the bier. And well, let's see if he's really dead, right? But they say, no, you're going to deface the body of our master. So they want to give him a shove, and they say, you're going to deface the body of our master. So they let him go. Rabbi Yochanan sneaks out of the city, and he goes to see the general Vespasian. Act 2, Scene 3. Rabbi Yochanan, the leader of the rabbis' party, stands in the tent of Vespasian. You get that? Now, this didn't happen, but it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. The guy who's going to destroy the city is sitting there with the guy who's going to save the Jews. The Jewish leader and the Roman leader look at each other, and they both shrug their shoulders. I mean, it's this wonderful moment. You see this? So Rabbi Yochanan reached the Romans. He says, Shalom Aleichem, Melech. Peace be to you, Melech, Vespasian. And Vespasian says, now, the rabbis are rabbis, so they make Vespasian sound like a rabbi. Right? First of all, they put him in Aramaic or Hebrew. So Vespasian says, your life is forfeit on 2 counts. Number 1, I'm not a king, and you call me a king. Number 2, if I am a king, here's the better question. Why didn't you come before? Now, stop for, don't turn the page quite yet. You've got to hear that question. What is Vespasian saying to him? I don't want to destroy your city. I don't want to destroy your civilization. I have no interest in bringing death and destruction here. Where is your governance? Where is your leadership? Why are we in this situation? I mean, they put into Vespasian's mouth the sound of the regret of Jewish history. They put into Vespasian's mouth the sound of a reasonable leader. It says, look, I have no interest in destroying you people. He's not an anti-Semite. Now, you'll see in a minute, his son is. He's not an anti-Semite. He's a pragmatic military commander. I have no interest in being here. What the hell happened to you? What the hell? Where is your leadership? And you get the sense of regret on the part of the rabbis because they're identifying in this story with Vespasian, not with Rabbi Yochanan. Right? I'll be right with you. And if he's, so Rabbi Yochanan says, if you weren't the king, Jerusalem would never be delivered to you. And he shows them a bunch of verses of the Bible to prove that. I took it out because you don't need to hear that. The answer is the zealots are among us. And they wouldn't let me out. So what does Rabbi Yochanan say? I've lost control of my people. I've lost control to the terrorists. So Vespasian says to him, now this is so rabbinic. Vespasian said to him, if there's a jar of honey round which a serpent is wound, would they not break the jar to get rid of the serpent? And so Rabbi Yochanan had no answer. All right, so if you have a jar of honey and there's a snake around it, the only way to get rid of snake is to smash the whole thing, right? So what is Vespasian saying to him? Listen, if you're telling me that the zealots, the terrorists, run the city, and that you have no power to govern this place and to bring reasonable governance to this place, then I have no choice but to destroy this city. I mean, and they're putting into Vespasian's mouth a regret. I don't want to do this, but this is what I have to do because I have to pacify this part of the world for the Roman government. And then the rabbis jump into the conversation. The next line comes from rabbis who lived 3 generations later. Rabbi Yochanan could give no answer. Rabbi Yosef, and some say Rabbi Akiva. Now, what's amazing is Rabbi Akiva is the student and grand student of Rabbi Yochanan. He's actually the student of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, who were the guys that carried him out. 2 generations later, Rabbi Akiva says to him, Schmuck! Fool! Dunkov! You could have given him a better answer. Right? Right? God turns wise men backwards and makes their knowledge foolish. That's a really nice way of saying, God, you're so brilliant, Rabbi Yochanan. You're so brilliant. Why did your wisdom depart from you? Fool. You could have said to him, you take a pair of tongs, you grip the snake, you take it off, and you save the jar. Duh. Answer. You go into the city, and the populace will deliver to you the terrorists because we don't want the city destroyed, and you save Jerusalem. What did Rabbi Akiva just say? You could have saved Jerusalem. Why didn't my ancestors save Jerusalem? Well, when it goes again, right? At that moment, a messenger comes and says to Vespasian, the emperor is dead, and the notables of Rome have elected you head of state. At that moment, a telegram comes from Western Union and says, Mazel Tov, you're now the Roman emperor. Anybody remember the opening scene of Godfather 1? On the day of the Godfather daughter's wedding, you can ask for anything. Right? Frankie Valone wants the part in the movie. That gives you the horse head. The baker wants his daughter's rape taken care of. No, he wants the daughter's son-in-law. And the undertaker wants his daughter's rapist to be taken care of. Remember these? That's Torah, guys. Come on. On the day that the emperor is told that he's the new emperor, you can ask for anything and he has to give it to you. Has to give it to you by Roman custom, by Roman halacha. So what happens? Vespasian says to Rabbi Yochanan, I'm now going to Rome, and will send someone to take my place. Make a request of me, and I'll grant it. What should he ask for? Save the city. Save the temple. Save the residents of God in our midst. Save the land. Take the zealots out of it, but don't destroy the land. That's what Rabbi Yochanan should have answered. Listen to what Rabbi Yochanan answers. Give me Yavne and its scholars. Yavne is a small town near the coast. Give me a safe haven where I can set up shop, where I can set up my academy, where I can teach my Torah. Let my students out of the city. Give them safe passage out of the city. Let me establish a center of Torah in the world. I'm not going to touch the city. The family of Rabbi Gamliel, who's the Nasi, the head of the community. Once again, Rav Yosef and Rabbi Akiva say, ah! Ah! You get that here? You got to hear the scream. Right? God turns wise men backwards, makes their knowledge free. He ought to have said, release Jerusalem. Now the Talmud comes and answers Rabbi Akiva here. Very unusual. The Talmud said, they're trying to imagine, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan ask for the city? And the answer is, he thought he would not be granted that much, and even a little would be saved. He wanted to save what he could. He was afraid that the request would be turned down, and he wanted to save what he could.
They wanted to break the back of the priesthood. They wanted to end the priesthood.
It could be that they want to end the priesthood, but
the way of politics.
Okay, hang on. You're right. You're not wrong. So, but you hear what the Talmud is asking us? Once again, why was Jerusalem destroyed? According to Rabbi Akiva, because sometimes in moments of pressure, in moments of crisis, leaders forget themselves. They forget their wisdom, right? But the more interesting question is, Vespasian's question is, why are you Jews killing each other and not coming to fight us? We came all the way from Rome to have a war, and you guys are killing each other. That's not fair. I mean, we want a war. Come on, give us a war. But really, Rabbi Yochanan, he could have asked for anything. Why doesn't he ask for peace? And Pop says it's because the internal politics of the people of Israel, he wanted to break the back of the priesthood. That could be. Bobby.
This is so frustrating.
Oh, this is frustrating?
Yes.
This is Torah.
Yeah, it's frustrating. Where is the concept of courage?
Yeah.
In all of this?
Well,
and can you
why are you saying that? Go ahead. What's the context?
Because this sounds to me like a lack of courage on the part of specific rabbis.
Yeah.
They knew what to do. They didn't want to do it because they were afraid.
First of all, let's set this context properly. This didn't happen. It didn't happen. This is the rabbis telling a story 150, 250, 350 years later. They're looking backwards and they're saying, what happened? And they're really not interested in the historical facts. This isn't, history. This is morality. God was exiled from the world. Who did it and why? How do we exile God from the world? What are the lessons for communal leadership that we have to learn? And the rabbis are placing the entire blame on themselves. You see this? And you're right. In the context of the narrative, in which the rabbis are saying, when I govern a community, here are the things I have to remember, courage becomes a very important process. It becomes a very, very important element. Now, let's take up Pop's suggestion for a minute. Was Rabbi Yochanan wrong? Rabbi Akiva thought he was wrong. Rabbi Akiva, who never criticizes his teachers, criticizes his teacher in brutal language. I mean, it's just brutal what Rabbi Akiva says here. Fool, you forgot everything. I mean, but really, stop for a minute. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. The Talmud, the stam of the Talmud, the anonymous voice of the Talmud tries to explain at least a pragmatic answer. Can we try to figure for a moment? Let's remind you, we do know, by the way, that Rabbi Yochanan and his students left the city. They did establish an academy in Yavne. Whether he had this confrontation with Vespasian or not, we can't tell. But why would he make that calculation? Why would the rabbi say he made that calculation if they're not proud of it?
And there was one
There, hang on, put the microphone. You can pop the mic. Wait, you're gonna be famous all over the world.
And there was one more thing.
Yeah.
They wanted to switch from animal sacrifice to prayer.
Yeah. Well, let's go a little bit. Let's go farther. Let's go much farther. You could make a case. You could make a very strong case. And it's going to sound very difficult. So let me try to make the case, and then I'll tell you why it's difficult. That Rabbi Yochanan saw into the future. That if the Jewish people places all of its identity, all of its sensibility of who it is, on a building in Jerusalem, on a piece of land in the Middle East, that makes us terribly vulnerable to the exigencies of political economy, of geopolitics. Someone's going to come along and destroy it. If not these guys, the next guys. If not these guys, the next guys. It's time, Rabbi Yochanan said, to recognize that we're not a political people alone. We are, but that's not the only. There is another element to our identity, which is universal, which belongs everywhere. And so what he's trying to do is to unplug Jewish identity from a place, a time, a building, an institution, and plug it into a world where we can exist everywhere. Think for just a moment. Because of Rabbi Yochanan's choice, we survived 1,800 years of exile. How did Jews survive 1,800 years? If we hadn't made that calculation at that moment, if we had said we are a temple-based people, a Jerusalem-based people, an Eretz Yisrael-based people, if not the Romans, the Byzantines, or the Muslims, or the Persians, or the Turks, or the Crusaders, or any number of enemies could have come and destroyed it, and we would have been done as a people. This is the great transition of the Jewish people from political community, landed political community, to spiritual community. And a spiritual community doesn't need a land. You can do it in Densmore and Ventura. And a spiritual community doesn't need temporal power. You need a new gym, but that's all you need. Right? A spiritual community doesn't need the things that a political community. Now, and that is the operant Jewish theory until another great leader comes about in 1897, whose name is Theodor Herzl. And he says the opposite. He says what was true for Rabbi Yochanan in the first century is not true anymore. Anti-Semitism has changed. The world has changed. The geopolitics of the world have changed. And if Jews don't have a land and don't have a city and don't have temporal power, we're not going to survive. And so in 1897, the Jewish people reverse Rabbi Yochanan's choice, and we return to Eretz Yisrael. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all of Jewish history in 5 minutes. But you see what's going on here? I mean, so this is the argument. But you hear Rabbi Akiba's argument here is, why is it that leaders lose their minds at certain crisis points? And the Talmud jumps in and says, no, he didn't lose his mind. He had a vision much farther than the rest of us, much broader than the rest of us. So the question here really is, how do you keep God in the world? And how do you keep the Jewish people in the world? Because no matter how you read the story, the answer comes out the same. The Romans didn't destroy the temple, we did. The Romans didn't exile God from the world, we did. The Romans didn't send the Jews into Gullus, into exile, we did. The Romans never defeated us, we did. And we'll do it again and again and again until we learn the lessons. That's why this is recorded in the Talmud. You want to hear what happens at the end? At the end, I got to tell you, it's fun, but it's pornographic. Are you in for a little religious pornography? All right, yeah. You want to ask something?
I want to go back to David's question, which is, how does this apply to modernity?
Okay.
It doesn't work.
Okay. How does it
apply to modernity? It doesn't work.
How does this apply to modernity? It doesn't work. Okay. First of all, these guys had 300 years of perspective, and you and I don't. Okay? Number two, and the question really is, when we will go back later, 300 years from now, and tell the stories of mid-20th century Jewry? What stories will we tell? And where did our community, let me put it this way, and I don't mean to, I'm not going to offer this as a theory, but just as an idea. Where did our community see the destruction coming and fail to respond? These guys have the benefit of hindsight, right? We have the benefit of hindsight. When we look back at it, we say, okay, and what lessons can we learn? The real question, Douglas, isn't why did it happen? The real question is what lessons do I learn? And that, by the way, right now is a very active question in the Jewish community. What lesson do you learn from the Holocaust? Do you learn the lesson of the Holocaust that no goyim can ever be trusted? There are people who learn that lesson. Do you learn the lesson that we have to isolate ourselves and insulate ourselves from Western civilization because Western civilization is invariably evil, brutal, and anti-Semitic? There are those who learn that lesson. They live in Williamsburg, and right? Do you learn the lesson that Jews may never live in the world without power, and that Jews without power is an invitation to destruction? That's Benjamin Netanyahu's lesson from the Holocaust. His father wrote that explicitly, right? That's how he learned it. Do we learn the lesson that our responsibility is to protect liberal democratic societies that are tolerant of all peoples? Because the attack on Jews is not just an attack on Jews, it's an attack on peoples everywhere, and we have to protect liberal democracies. That's what the American Jewish community pretty much has decided. What lesson do we tell our kids? Okay? That's the real question. Forget the historiography of this. That's true. But really the question is, what lesson do we draw? What lessons do you draw from the Holocaust? And by the way, this is the time to start asking that very earnestly, because within the lifetime of our children, the last survivor will be gone. I have a kid who came to see me this week, really beautiful kid. He wants to go on March of the Living this spring, needs help for the scholarship. And I said to him, why do you want to go? And he looked at me, he said, because I'll be the last one to hear a survivor tell me the story while we're standing at Auschwitz. And I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I have friends who've gone. The last survivors are in their late 90s now. If you were 20 in 1945, how old are you now, right? Right? He said, I'm so blessed. I can hear a survivor tell me the story. He said, but my younger brother's never going to hear that. I mean, that you think, right? So now that that's happening, we can ask the question in earnest, without violating the memory of the dead and without violating the courage of the living. What can we learn from this? What can we really learn from this? And it's a very interesting question. It's a question it's very difficult to really puzzle through. Okay? All right, really quickly, I know you want to get to the pornographic ending of it. Vespasian goes to Rome and he sends his son Titus. Titus, now, again, the rabbis are telling the story, so Titus becomes a rabbinical scholar. Titus quotes Deuteronomy, our book. Where is their God, the rock in whom they trusted? Right? So Titus comes out, and Titus, in other words, is saying, my war is not against these Jews. Jews. My war is against God. They imagine Titus making war against God because he's the son of the Roman emperor, who is God, right? Titus was wicked. He was wicked.
How wicked was he?
Let's try that again. Titus was wicked.
How wicked was he?
He blasphemed and insulted heaven. What did he do?
What did he do?
Come on, guys, come on. Now, this is, when we were little kids, the question was, what's the worst sin you can do? Eat a ham sandwich on Yom Kippur, on the bima, in front of the Torah, while insulting the sisterhood president. So Titus does the worst thing you can do, right? He took a harlot by the hand, entered the Holy of Holies, spread out a scroll of the law, and committed a sin. Right? But no Roman would do that, because that doesn't mean anything in Roman, but only a Jew would imagine that, right? Because you see. Then he took a sword and he slashed the curtain. There was a curtain that protected the Holy. He slashed it, miraculously blood spurted out, and he thought that he'd slain God. Generations later, Abba Hanan said, Micha mocha bailim Adonai, right? And who is like the mighty in self-restraint? You heard the blasphemy and insults of the wicked man and kept silent, In the school of Rabbi Shmuel, it was taught, it's Micha Mocha Alim. Who is like you among the deaf? You were silent, God. You didn't say anything. Then Titus took a curtain, shaped it like a basket, brought all the vessels of the sanctuary, got on a ship, and went back to his city. You ever see the Ark of Titus? It's in the Roman Forum. What do you see on the Ark of Titus? The menorah and the other vessels of the Holy Temple. So this part's historical. A gale sprang up at sea, which threatened to wreck Titus. He said, apparently the power of God is over water. When Pharaoh came, he drowned him in water. When Sister came, he drowned him. He's also trying to drown me. If he is really mighty, let him come up on dry land and fight with me. A voice went forward and said, sinner, son of a sinner, descendant of Esau, the sinner, I have a tiny creature called a gnat. Go up to dry land, make war with it. He came, and the gnat came and entered his nose and knocked against his brain for 7 years. I don't know if this is historical, if Titus had migraine headaches, but this is a migraine, right? One day as he was passing a blacksmith's, he heard the noise of the hammer and it stopped. The noise stopped. So he says, I see there's a remedy. So they brought in a blacksmith who hammered in front of him. This is where you get the Yiddish expression, Chak mir a Chainik. Bang me until I get to China, right? Right? Because the idea is the only way that he could get relief from his headache is if a blacksmith, you get the picture, right? So they brought a blacksmith. They said, if he was a non-Jew, they paid him 4 zuz. If he was a Jew, they said, it's enough you see the suffering of your enemy. I mean, it's a fantasy of what happens to bad guys, right? And it's taught, when he died, they opened his head and a bird jumped out, right? And finally, at the end, what happens is, Onkelos, son of Colonicus, was the sister of Titus's sister, was the son of Titus' sister. He had a mind to convert to Judaism. What was the ultimate revenge? His descendants became Jews, right? If you'll turn the page over, just the last page, and I'll just give you this and we'll finish. These are all the other discussions in the Talmud, not all of them, many of the other discussions of why we lost Jerusalem. Just look at the first one. Talmud Yoma, the famous Gemara. The first temple that Nebuchadnezzar killed and destroyed in 586 was destroyed because of the sins of idolatry, indecency, and murder, which is what Jeremiah pointed out, right? The second temple, in spite of the widespread study of Torah and performance of mitzvahs during its existence, that's not true, but that's their imagination, generations later, fell because of sinat chinam. Sinat means hatred. Chinam means, well, in modern Hebrew it means free, without a charge, but it means without bounds, without limits. Just uncontrollable, boundless, internecine rivalry. Hatred, right? Boundless hatred is a sin that weighs as heavily as idolatry, indecency, and murder. It's one of the very few places where Talmudic literature is substantiated by outside literature. Josephus was a Jew, was a commander in the revolt army. He was taken prisoner early in the war and turned coat and became the court historian for the Roman generals, the Roman Empire. And he wrote the history of the war. It's called the Jewish War. It's a great celebration of Roman courage in destroying the Temple of Jerusalem, but it gives the whole background. And he tells a story that's remarkably parallel to the rabbi's story. That while the Romans besieged the city of Jerusalem, the Jews were fighting among themselves more than they were fighting the Romans. And that the Zealots who started the war soon abandoned the war because they couldn't command the populace to fight. And so they abandoned the war, went out to Masada, and hung out there until the Romans went out there and got them. The idea that we couldn't unite as a people, even with an enemy literally at the door, is the story that Josephus tells. It's the story that the rabbis tell. So you read this story in Torah today about what happens if you violate the laws of God, right? And the rabbis come along and say, it's not divine punishment. It's a consequence of the inability of our people to find its way in the world, to gather around reasonable leadership. It's the inability of leadership to have a vision. It's the inability of the vision of the leaders to capture the imagination of the populace. And the only way that God is exiled from the world is if we do it ourselves. It's a very poignant, difficult, disturbing tale, and it's, I think, a good tale to start Rosh Hashanah with. Take care. Have a good Shabbos. Tonight we'll see you. You have nothing to say. You have to join. Come on.
I didn't want to interrupt you. You were on a...
Yeah, it's good.
I'm going home to New York on Wednesday.
All right, safe trip, safe travels. Be careful. Crazy people in that city. Be careful. You going back to your old shul?
Yeah, every year I preach at